Hello folks, this is Sullla once again. What we're going to be looking at here is this is going to be sort of a video log slash podcast thing where what we do is look a little bit at the upcoming Season 3 World Championship, which is starting this weekend as you watch this. If you're watching this later on, then obviously it'll be out of date. This was requested on the patch preview or patch review video that I did earlier this week. A lot of people just wanted me to talk about the upcoming, well, Season 3 World Championship to get some thoughts. I'll try to keep this so it doesn't go on too long. We'll see. Like a lot of people, once I start talking, it tends to go on longer than expected. But let me go through. I'll try to talk a little bit about the actual format for people who have not been reading up on this as far as what they're actually going to be doing. I'll talk at least a little bit about the teams, the ones that I've seen. I have not seen a lot of these teams play, but I think I can speak decently for at least the North American and hopefully the European teams. And we'll see, maybe try to do some predictions, although I'm hesitant to say too much because, as I said, I haven't seen a lot of these teams play. But in any case, let's try to run through. As it says, I'm going to get this information from Leaguepedia because they are a great source for all the competitive League of Legends information. There are also a series of very nice articles about the teams at the World Championship at cloth5.com, cloth5, if you want to go and look that up. They posted some very nice articles this week about the teams as well. All right, so what do we have here? This is for the official Season 3 World Championship. There have been two previous World Championships, of course, in Season 1 and Season 2. There was also an unofficial championship in pre-Season 1, the initial World Cyber Games 2010, which was sort of like the Season 0 championship before they officially started Season 1. But anyway, so what is this? Well, all the different leagues around the globe that, there's many different local or regional leagues. They pool all their champions together, or, well, we'll get to that, but or champion-like teams, because some of the paths that some of the teams took to get here is very interesting. And anyway, they bring them together, and there is, of course, a big tournament. This is one thing that a lot of people don't seem to realize is that the tournament's going to go on for quite some time. It actually takes 3 full weeks for them to do the tournament, which is great because there's going to be a lot of games. That means 14 total teams broken down. It's three for most regions have either 3 or 2 teams. So let's go ahead and actually look at that, shall we? Here's the write-up that they have on the website. So the overview here, starting on September 15th, there are 14 teams. They're traveling to Los Angeles in the United States for the playoffs. The tournament has a group stage and then single elimination rounds after that. If you're familiar with the World Cup, it's a little bit like that. There's a group stage, and then the teams that advance past the group stage reach the knockout stage, and there they go to best of threes. Up until the grand final, which is a best of 5. It is not a double elimination tournament. There was a big thread on Reddit that discussed this. Why is it not a double elimination tournament? Sort of 2 or 3 reasons. Number 1, it takes too long. If they do a double elimination, it takes a very long time to go through all the games. So for scheduling purposes, it's simpler to do it that way. Number 2, it's harder for people to understand. You're going to have a lot of people who are not commonly people who would watch something like League of Legends on stream, and it's a lot easier for people to understand when you have a single elimination tournament as opposed to a double elimination tournament. And then third, I'd say, is because it's more like the way normal sports are played. I can't think of most athletic sports that use a double elimination tournament. It's really kind of something that only seems to exist in the esports arena. Now, granted, I'm sure that don't try to quote me some example. I'm sure someone somewhere uses a double elimination tournament, but most events are single elimination, and that's what they're using here. I know that Dota used double elimination for their tournament, but Riot's decided to do single elimination, and I am totally fine with that. In order to get knocked out of the tournament, in the knockout stage, you play a best of 3 set. So in order to lose, you have to lose twice. So, you lose 2 out of 3, I feel like you've already had your chance. You can get cheesed one game, but you still got then another chance. You still got to lose twice before you get knocked out. So I'm totally fine with that. I don't think that they need to do double elimination, but a lot of people seem to prefer that. But anyway, I think that with the way that it's set up, it works just fine. Alrighty, so 14 teams total. Kind of a weird number. I don't know why they're using 14 and not 16. It's very strange. 4 of those teams get automatically placed into the knockout stage, into the quarterfinals. Those are the top seeds from North America, Southeast Asia, China, and Korea. Although, as we'll see when we get to the actual teams, the number 1 team in each region is not necessarily the best team. So 4 teams get automatically placed into the knockout stages. The remaining 10 teams are in 2 groups of 5, and they play, wow, these ads are really annoying. They play a round robin. play a group of round robin matches. So two groups of five, and they each play. Each team is actually going to get to play 8 full games. The round robin stage actually goes on for quite some time. And then here's the prize money. As you can see, the first place team wins 1 million US dollars, and then it goes down from there. Pretty sharply, actually. Poor second place team only gets 250K. Third and fourth almost gets the same amount, even though they didn't reach nearly as far. But oh well. I guess there's no difference between third and fourth because they don't play a third place. They don't do a third place game. Alrighty, so here's the breakdowns again. Southeast Asia. Let's see, one team. Let's see, yeah. So Southeast Asia has one team. Taiwan, Hong Kong have one team. The international wildcard has one team. That's gone to a European team, actually. That's the international wildcard had teams from all different regions, from Australia, from Brazil, from Latin America, and from Turkey. But it was actually a European team that won. Kind of questionable that they were allowed to take part in that. But in any case, Europe has 3 teams, North America has 3 teams, Korea has 3 teams, and China has 2 teams, listed as mainland China because of the political situation with Taiwan. But anyway, so here are your teams. These are the 4 that are in the quarterfinals. Gamania Bears, that is the team from Southeast Asia. That's the Taiwanese champion, as I understand it. Najin Black Sword, which is the Korean first place team. Royal Club, which is the Chinese first place team. And Cloud9, which was the winner of the North American LCS. Now, Europe does not have a team in the quarterfinals. None of their teams made it to the knockout stage, and that's because Europe came in last place in the All-Stars, which is a really stupid way to do things, but that was the system Riot came up with, and Europe did come in last for All-Stars, so their teams are all in the group stages. And then here's the group stages. So Mineski from Southeast Asia. North Americans, 2 teams that came in second and third, Sullla Mid and Vulcan. The international wildcard team, Gaming Gear, which is from Lithuania. The Korean, well, teams that didn't get the #1 seed, Ozone and SK Telecom, which, by the way, are considered to be the best 2 Korean teams, but we'll get to that in a minute when we talk more about the teams individually. And then the 3 European teams, Fnatic, Lemon Dogs, Gambit Gaming. Everyone's probably pretty familiar with Fnatic and Gambit. Lemon Dogs not as much so because they're relatively new still. And then finally the other Chinese team, OMG, who is also in the group stages. Alright, so let's look first at the group stages, then we'll look at the teams in the quarterfinals after that. We'll just talk about this briefly, shall we? Alrighty, so Group A. We'll look at there. We have Lemon Dogs from EU. We have SK Telecom from Korea. Team Sullla Mid from North America. OMG from China. And GamingGear.eu from Lithuania. And what's interesting about this is what I think is going to be the most entertaining part of the whole tournament, is each of these teams is going to play 2 games against each of the other teams. They're going to play a red side game and a blue side game against each of the others. And then you can see the matchups listed here. So we're going to get a lot of games in Group A and a lot of games in Group B. Group B, Samsung Galaxy Ozone, another Korean team. Mineski, who I believe is from Southeast Asia. I believe that they are from the Philippines, based on what I've read. I don't know anything about them. Gambit Gaming and Fnatic, both from EU, and then Vulcan from North America. So they will play a whole bunch of matches, and here's the schedule. They start on September 15th. The times are designed so that they can fit with local time in Los Angeles. So they're on North American time. The times are really awful for Europe, so Europeans are kind of out of luck here. They're not quite as bad for people in East Asia and in Australia, but it's still some awkward times there. Still, there's not a whole lot you can do about this. I remember when they played IEM Kiev in the Ukraine, the times were awful for people in North America. When they did All-Stars in Shanghai, the times were pretty rough there as well. Unfortunately, it's a big world, and somebody's going to get screwed on the time zones, and it turns out that it is Europe as far as this goes. Anyway, but look at all these matches. These are all the group stage matches, so that's a whole lot of games. They're going to be playing these games from the 15th all the way up through the 21st, so as I said, that's almost a full week. Then after that, they'll go to the quarterfinals, the semifinals, and the grand finals. The quarterfinals are best of 3, so best 2 out of 3, got to win 2 to advance. Semifinals are the same thing, 2 out of 3, and then the grand final is a best of 5, so must win 3 games to advance from there. Alright, so let's go ahead and look at some of these groups, shall we? Talk about the individual teams. We'll start with Group A. There's a very heavy favorite to win Group A. That is SK Telecom T1. SK Telecom is widely perceived to be the strongest Korean team right now, and also strongly perceived to be the best team in the world. I've seen more people saying that they are the favorites to win this tournament than anyone else. Now, it might seem strange as to why they're in the group stage if they're so highly rated. Well, the reason for that being is they're a relatively new team. They were relatively new to the scene in Korea. They really came on strong in the summer split of the Korean OGN. They didn't have, I don't believe they had any OGN points from the winter split. I don't know if they even competed in that, although someone will probably correct me if I'm wrong, but basically they didn't have as many circuit points as some of the other teams. They actually had to play their way in, but they were the winners of OGN Summer, and then they, in the actual tournament that determined who would make it into the Worlds, they won that tournament as well between a whole bunch of other very, very good Korean teams. So this team is hugely favored to win the group. In fact, the people who follow the Korean team say that they would actually be shocked if SK Telecom does not win this group, does not advance as the top group out of Group A. We will see. I've never seen this team play, so I'm hesitant to say too much, but that is their reputation, and they will be heavy favorites against everyone except possibly the Chinese team, OMG, was also considered to be quite good. But there's not too much more for me to say because I have not seen this team play. In fact, I'm looking forward to seeing them play because I've never seen them. I know that a lot of people like to talk up the Korean matches in OGN. I'm sure they're good matches, but they come on at really weird times, and they're often casted in Korean. I know that there's English language casting, but I just can't get too excited about games that are played on the other side of the world and broadcast in a language I don't speak. I'm sure the quality of play is amazing, but I'd rather watch the North American and European games, to be perfectly honest. Anyway, though, so as I said, it'll be interesting to see what they do, and interesting to see what they're able to pull out. In particular, the general consensus is Faker is the best mid laner in the world right now, and quite possibly the best League of Legends player in the world right now. If you read League of Legends Reddit, I'm sure you've seen videos posted of his infamous Zed play in the OGN Summer Final, and a ZVZ duel. Anyway, though, so SK Telecom will be heavy favorites, and we'll get to see them play immediately on the first day because they're going to play Lemon Dogs, and I believe they have another game on the first day as well. Hold on here, let's see. They're playing Lemon Dogs and OMG. Yeah, this is a big early game that'll be fun to watch right here on the first day. OMG versus SK Telecom. So what about OMG? Well, they are the second team to come from China. The widespread perception, though, is that they actually are China's best team. That's what the word is. There is a widespread sort of conspiracy theory out there that in the Chinese qualifier that they deliberately lost to Royal Club because they preferred to be in the group stage as opposed to being in the quarterfinal stage. Now, why they would want to do that, I'm not entirely sure, but apparently they thought that the matchups were better. And that the word is that they threw the final deliberately because they knew where they would be and they preferred to be in Group A and they didn't want to be in the quarterfinals. So I don't know if that's true or not, but that's the word that's going around. I have not watched the the Chinese games either. The Chinese league, the LPL, is even harder to get coverage of. There's very little English casting whatsoever. It's pretty much all sort of grainy stuff that you watch on YouTube with Chinese language casters, so I really have not seen hardly anything from these teams. But the general word about the Chinese scene, again, this is just from what I've heard, is the Chinese scene, sort of the Chinese metagame, if you will, is extremely focused on early aggression, very, very heavy on team fightings, and that teams will team fight pretty much all the time, constantly, and that the Chinese teams like to pick team comps that are based around that, a lot of area of effect champions, a lot of, well, things that are really good at team fighting. And that the Chinese metagame is all about very, very heavy aggression and trying to go for kills. That's sort of what they emphasize. So, don't know if that's true, but that is the word. And again, interested to see. The sort of sharp opinions are the people who apparently are supposed to know things. Most people believe that OMG is most likely to be the other team to come out of Group A. Only out of these 5-team groups, the top 2 will make it to the quarterfinals. That's why you've got green for the top 2 here. So the smart money is on SK Telecom and OMG being the 2 to make it out of Group A. We'll have to see. I don't know if that will take place. I will feel like I'll have a much better feeling for this once I've seen these teams actually play. But I really want to see these teams play a game to get a sense because, as I've said, I've never seen either of these teams play. So my informed commentary, 2 teams I've never seen play, so I don't really know, but the word is they're quite good, and it'll be fun to see what they do. All right, other teams here. Let's talk briefly about Lemon Dogs. Not too many people know that much about Lemon Dogs. They're a European team. If you watch the EU LCS, you'll be familiar with them. Lemon Dogs was really came out of nowhere in the summer EU LCS. They were not in the spring split. They had to qualify. They successfully qualified and made it in. I'm pretty sure about that. I don't think that they were in. Well, I could be totally wrong, but I don't think that they were in the spring split. In any case, though, they kind of came out of nowhere in the summer split. They didn't get off to a very good start, but they really took off in the second half, and I believe they had like a I believe they finished like 10-4 or something like that down the stretch. And in the European LCS, all the teams were bunched so closely together. They were the only team that kind of separated themselves from the rest of the pack and got out to the front. Now, I didn't see them play a lot of games during the EU LCS. I did see them play in the EU LCS playoffs, where they did quite well. They won their initial matchup, and then they lost to Fnatic, lost rather convincingly to Fnatic in the actual championship. So they ended up as sort of the number 2 seed from Europe, but that didn't matter because none of the European teams got a bye into the quarterfinals. So they're in the group pool as well. Their team, they play sort of the typical European style that's based on relying heavily on the mid laner, on Nuke Duck. And again, I admittedly I have not seen Lemon Dogs play that many games, but basically the European teams generally like to do a lot of skirmishing, tend to rely pretty heavily on the mid laner in a lot of ways. Look for them to make plays, and granted, I know that that's not all that uncommon, but more so in that region than in a lot of others. Not a lot of talk about them that I'm hearing. I mean, because again, they seem to be one of those teams that's just kind of under the radar because they're not as well known, because they're relatively new to the League of Legends competitive scene. I would not be surprised at all to see them do well here. Again, it's just a team that just seems to be, well, a dark horse of sorts because people don't really seem to be paying that much attention to them. If by some chance they can, their key matchups will be against, again, probably not so much SK Telecom because they'll probably beat everyone, but their key matchups will be against Sullla Mid and OMG because one of these 3 teams will probably get that second spot. So those will be the really important games, and we'll see what they bring out. Nuke Duck is known for pulling out a really nasty fizz in mid. I believe I've seen him getting respect bans on that, so we shall see, but they really were good in the second half of the summer split. So if they carry that over, it'll be fun to see. And they're really carrying the banner for Europe in Group A. It's the only European team there. So we will see. We will see. I just don't know what to say as far as where they're going to come out in this group because Lemon Dogs has never played any of these teams. Well, they might have played Gaming Gear EU, but they've never played any of these other teams before. So it's hard to say. Alrighty, well, what else do we have? We have Team Sullla Mid. Sullla Mid is one of the most famous teams in the world. Pretty much anyone who's seen competitive league has probably watched them play. Sullla Mid is the only team that has been in all of the official Season 1, Season 2, Season 3 championships. They're the only team to make it through make it to all of them. They did quite well in the Season 1 championship. They came in 3rd place, and they actually were very close to making it to the final. They lost, I may be one of the people who, as one of the few people who's watched League long enough to remember this, but they played against All Authority in the semifinals. They lost a very close 2-1 in that semifinal matchup, and would have been in the finals of Season 1 otherwise, but ended up coming in 3rd place in that one. As Season 2 Worlds were a disaster for them. They automatically got placed into the quarterfinals, into the knockout stage, because they had won North American Regional. Season 2, they played Azubu Frost, and they lost both games 2-0, and they were immediately out of the World Tournament. It was not a great showing from them. Their one excuse is Azubu Frost was almost certainly the best team in the world at that time. Frost was really, really good. It's still kind of shocking they didn't win, that they got upset by Taipei Assassins in the final. So in a way, they have an excuse because they did play an extremely good team. But that said, they didn't win any games at Season 2 Worlds, and they've been having to deal with that ever since. Of course, since then, Season 3, in the spring split of the North American LCS, Sullla Mid had kind of an up and down regular season, but they closed the season really strong. They ended up taking 1st place, and they won the spring playoff. So they came in 1st in regular season and 1st in playoff, admittedly helped by the collapse of Dignitas and Curse at the end of the spring split, when they both fell apart at the end of the spring. In the summer split, they were a train wreck for most of the season. They hovered around 500, didn't really look too good. Still ended up with the 3rd seed because a lot of the other North American teams also didn't look very good. Then in the playoffs, they beat CounterLogic 2-0. They beat Vulcan 2-0, and that was probably their best performance of the entire summer. When they played Vulcan, they looked very good in their 2 games against Vulcan. And then they got destroyed by Cloud9, 0-3 in the finals. So they ended up with the 2nd seed and got placed into the group stage. With Sullla Mid, they're a hard team to read. Sometimes they look great, sometimes they look terrible. They looked really good at the North American playoffs. At regionals, they looked pretty good. They did well against Counter Logic. They did really well against Vulcan. So really is the question is what Sullla Mid's going to show up. Is it going to be the team that just crushed Vulcan in 2 games, or is it going to be the team that looked totally lost against Cloud9 in the finals? Or is it going to be the team that closed the spring split that looked really strong? Or is it going to be the team that wandered around looking lost and barely managed a 500 record in the summer split? So who knows? Their team is heavily dependent on Reginald getting fed and winning in mid lane. And he's going to be up against some very, very good mid laners in this particular stage. When Reginald does well, they typically win. When he has bad games, they typically get crushed. So we shall see, but it's going to be awful tough for them to win against some of these teams. We shall see. I don't think it's impossible for them to advance out of this group, but I do think it will be very difficult with the teams that they're up against. Again, for Lemon Dogs, Sullla Mid, and OMG, their crucial games are really against each other. So think of this as a bit kind of a 3-man pool for that second slot to advance out of this group. Gaming Gear EU, not really on the same level as these other teams. Now, they'll probably win a game or two because they are playing 8 matches. I'm sure they'll steal a game from someone, but not really considered to be at the same level as these other teams. So, brief discussion about them. Now, I don't know a whole lot about Gaming Gear. I did see them play in the International Wildcard. I saw them play a couple of their games. They did well in that. They were definitely the best team in the International Wildcard. They defeated the Brazilian team that I think was the favorite to advance out of that and did so fairly convincingly. That said, Gaming Gear tried to qualify for the EU LCS and got nowhere close to making it. I mean, like not even close to making it to the EU LCS. And apparently they used to scrimmage against a lot of the European LCS teams, and they did not do very well in those games. So that's why most people don't think they're going to do all that much. They kind of made it to the World Championships through a bit of a loophole. This is a Lithuanian team, so they're obviously a European team. Now, they actually were eligible to qualify for the European LCS. They just didn't make it. They were able to exploit kind of a loophole in the fact that because they're from Lithuania, this is the Lithuanian flag, by the way, for those who are curious. Because they're from Lithuania, they were able to go to the regional qualifier in Russia for the the former Soviet country Commonwealth. They had their own regional. They managed to win that. Then they went to the international wildcard and they beat the Turkish and the Brazilian and the Latin American teams. So they're kind of like a second or third tier European team that just kind of made their way into Worlds nonetheless. So again, not expecting them to do that much, especially now that there's footage of them playing in the international wildcard that teams can scout. Like teams will be able to see who they played and they'll be able to direct pick some bans against them because they did play in about 8 games in that international wildcard. So, I mean, they're a team that people don't know a whole lot about, but they're generally not expected to be on the same level as these other teams. So, as I said, they will win a game or two. They'll probably win 1 or 2 out of their 8 matches. And it'll probably be really devastating for who they beat. Like, if Gaming Gear beats Sullla Mid, that would be a devastating loss because, you know, you got to avoid basically, you got to avoid losing to Gaming Gear EU and then beat your other rivals under the assumption that probably no one's going to have too much success against SK Telecom. So how do I think the group shakes out? I think SK Telecom easily takes the first seed based on the fact that they are Korea's best team right now, and Korea seems to be clearly a step ahead of the other regions. Just based on what I saw at All-Stars, the Korean team was significantly better than all of the other regions. So I think that if they're the best Korean team right now, they will probably easily qualify from this group. It's a 3-man scrum for the other spot. Maybe OMG is really good and just steamrolls Lemon Dogs and Sullla Mid, but I don't know. I've never seen them play. So I say 3-man scrum between these 3 teams, and then Gaming Gear will be sort of a distant last place in this group. That's how I see it, but we shall see. Perhaps Gaming Gear comes out and stuns everybody. After all, nobody expected much from the Taipei Assassins last year, and, well, they just kept winning all the way to the championship. But that's how I see Group A. Alrighty, let's take a look then at Group B. Okay, in this group, we have some teams that are quite familiar. It's heavy on the European teams because there's 2 EU teams in this particular region. Let's go through and look at some of these teams in order. I guess I'll just go through the order. Well, I guess, I don't know. We'll just go through them in sort of in order here. I guess we'll start with the other Korean team, Samsung Galaxy Ozone, formerly MVP Ozone. They just had their sponsor changed in the last couple weeks. This is another one of the Korean powerhouse teams. They did not win the summer split, but I I don't know. I think they won the spring split. I could be wrong on that. All I know is that they have been for the last in the spring and summer they've been considered to be one of the top teams in Korea and have been very, very successful. People especially talk of their bottom lane. That Imp Mata is really good. That Dandy, their jungler, is very, very highly praised. Obviously, everybody on this team is good. Their mid laner not quite as hyped up as Faker on Telecom, but is also quite good. So again, I have not personally seen this team play at all, but they've been playing at the highest level of the Korean Professional League for some time now. So they are again a pretty heavy favorite to take one of the two spots here, and it would be surprising to people who follow like the worldwide scene if they don't get one of these two. I suppose we'll see, but again, the general word is that they're probably not quite as good as SK Telecom. They're probably the second best team coming out of Korea just because they haven't been as quite on point recently as they were in the past. But again, they will be a pretty heavy favorite to get one of the two spots. That's sort of the general consensus. They will likely get one of the two, and then it'll be a widespread fight between the other teams for those other spots. Anyway, we have some very well-known teams for these other spots. From Europe, we have Fnatic and Gambit. I guess I'll mention Fnatic first. Fnatic has really been a long-time staple of the competitive scene. Now they've changed their membership around quite a bit, but Fnatic's been around from the very early days of competitive play. Fnatic was the Season 1 champion, for those who remember, although they had a very different roster back in Season 1. That roster was heavily based on Shushe, carrying them from the mid position. So they've changed a lot of people around, but they do, in fact, have a very strong lineup. In Season 2, they did not qualify. They actually fell just short. At Season 2 EU Regionals, they were in the third place game against CLG EU, the current Evil Geniuses. They lost that match and they did not make it, which was a real shame for them, but they were really close. They actually were a victim of bad luck. They probably should have been at the Season 2. They really should have been at the Season 2 World Championship. What happened was, in the semifinal stage, they played against Moscow 5, the current Gambit Gaming. They lost to them, which was not a surprise because, well, Moscow 5 was really good. They were clearly the best European team. Well, I don't know. Maybe CLGU was better, but they were very close. But they played Moscow 5 slash Gambit Gaming in their semifinal match, and then presumably they would have played SK in the third place match, and they were likely better than SK at that time. But because SK unexpectedly beat CLG EU, they ended up playing CLG EU, and then they lost that match. They were a little bit unlucky, but anyway, they've qualified once again in Season 3. They've been very strong in the EU LCS. They were the winners of the EU LCS in the spring, came in first place, looked really strong. They were not as dominant in the summer split of the EU LCS. They were in that giant cluster, you know what, in the middle of the European pack where there were, I think, 6 teams that were separated by like one game at the end of the season. They were right in the middle of all that mess, but they managed to come through it. They won a number of their games in sort of the knockout tiebreaker thing, and then in the playoffs, they won their semifinals, and then they won the final over Lemon Dogs. So they did, in fact, come in first place in the EU LCS playoffs. And they looked good. They looked quite good in those games. I saw those games in the finals. They looked very good in those games. So Fnatic will be, they'll be a real factor. I mean, they have a good chance to come out of this group. They could very easily be the first or second place team to come out of here. For anyone who watches Fnatic, what you know is their team goes as far as Xpeka can take them. Xpeka is one of the most famous mid laners in the world, and when he does well, Fnatic usually wins. If he struggles, if he's off his game, then they typically lose. And I know that that's not exactly going out on a limb, but they rely very heavily on Xpeka to carry from the mid lane. The team is really built around him in the same way that, well, we'll get to some other teams that are built around one person, but their team is very heavily dependent on him. So we will see. Xpeka is the one to watch, and it's going to be fun watching some of these mid laner matchups that we're going to see in these group stages, and then beyond that in the knockout stages. The other European team, Gambit Gaming, quite famous, of course, well known as Moscow 5. They had to change their name and they had to change their sponsorship to Gambit Gaming because the CEO of Moscow 5 was arrested earlier this year, and so they had to change their sponsor because their former organization, Moscow 5, came under investigation for shady business practices. Anyway, Gambit's been around for quite some time. They really burst onto the scene last year. They have an incredible record in on-site LAN performances. They've actually never finished worse than 4th in any LAN that they've ever been to. In fact, they've won over half of the LANs, the local area network or on-site tournaments. They've won over half of the ones they've ever been to. And they've just really, I mean, they've almost never looked bad since they've appeared on the screen. The only time they've ever looked bad was really in the summer EU LCS for a variety of reasons. So they're quite famous, a lot of really well known players. Darien in top lane, Diamond in the jungle, Alex in mid, and Genja in the bottom lane. They did have to make a roster change after Edward went over to North America and joined Curse, so they have replaced Edward with Voidal. I don't think Voidal is as good as Edward was, or at least not as good for their team. They have not seemed to be quite at the same level since Edward left, but still very formidable. And as they get more time and more chance to practice with Voidal, they'll surely be able to work on their coordination. So Gambit has had a number of things going against them recently. Gambit's style is one that plays really well for local tournaments, for on-site LANs. And let me explain what I mean by that. One of the real strengths of Gambit is they're very good at coming up with unorthodox picks, champions that no one's seen before, or putting a champion in a new role, like, for example, when Diamond was playing Jungle Karma earlier this year. So back in Season 2, when there was no LCS, when there was no weekly games played, what would happen is the teams would play a tournament, and then everyone would go home, and then nothing would happen for about 1 to 2 months, and then there'd be another big tournament, and suddenly all the teams would play a big flurry of games, then nothing would happen again for a month, and then there'd be another tournament, etc. That was a style that really played to Gambit's strength, because they were located way off in Russia, people wouldn't see them playing a lot. There was always sort of this aura of mystery around them, and then they'd show up at a tournament, and they'd be playing these weird picks, and by the time people started to adjust to them, the tournament would be over, and then, no one would see them again for weeks and weeks afterwards. So that was a format that played really well to their strengths, their ability to innovate new strategies and come up with unconventional champion picks. Now, a lot of those strengths were taken away in the weekly LCS format, where they have to come and play 2 to 3 games every single week. That was something that didn't play so much to their strengths, and that's partly why they haven't looked as good in the LCS. They also have the issue of travel. They have to travel to the EU LCS, which I believe is played in Cologne. It's somewhere in Germany. I think it's in Cologne. They have to fly all the way from Russia out to Cologne every single week. They also do not have their own gaming house. Their players, unlike most of these teams, do not live together, so it limits how much time. I believe that they've said they only have about 1/3 as much practice time as most of the typical other teams due to their travel and due to the fact that they don't live together. So all that causes a lot of problems for Gambit, and that's partly why they haven't looked so good in the European LCS. They were just average, basically, which is not what you typically expect from them. What we now have is they've had 3 weeks now where they, haven't been playing games in the European LCS, where they haven't had to travel, where they've supposedly been boot camping. So all of that are things that typically play to their strengths. There's a good chance they will pull out something weird or unconventional that you're not used to seeing, and it will take people by surprise. So this kind of format definitely plays more to their strengths, as I've said. They're an unpredictable team. You never know when they're going to show up, and they're just suddenly going to start stomping all over everyone. They are also one of the very few teams in this tournament that has had success against Korean teams in the past. Gambit has done very well in some of these international tournaments against Korean teams. One of the few non-Korean teams to do that, in all honesty. Most of these other teams have not had much success against the top Korean team. Certainly Sullla Mid hasn't, which has never actually won a set against a Korean team. I believe that there's something like 0-12 or something, something silly like that. But Gambit, that is not the case. So the history is there, and the preparation is there, and a lot of people are looking at them to come out of this group stage too. So Gambit absolutely could make it. Fnatic absolutely could make it. I would not be surprised to see either of them make it. I would not be surprised to see both of them make it. They're both very good squads. So like I said, it will be fun to watch them play and see. All right, but there are still 2 more groups, 2 more teams in this group. I will mention Vulcan first, which is sort of, I would put Vulcan together with Lemon Dogs as 2 teams in the group stage that just seem to be flying under the radar. They are the quote-unquote dark horse group of this second group. A little bit about Vulcan. They're the team that has been in the North American LCS for both the spring and summer split. In the spring season, they got off to a terrible start. They were something like 0-6 at the beginning, and it looked like they were going to get relegated out. What they did was they replaced their support. They brought in Bloodwater, and they played much better after that. They came on very strong at the end of the spring split. They managed to, they came in 6th place in the regular season, but they had a great run in the spring playoffs. They actually came in 2nd. They lost 3-2 to Sullla Mid in the final of the playoffs. So they did very well in the playoffs, and then they really carried that over into the summer split, where they got off to a great start and never looked back. They finished in second place, and they actually had a really good record. For those who don't know, they were 20-8 in the summer split, 20 wins, 8 losses. It's just that they were overshadowed by Cloud9's ridiculous record. Cloud9 was 25-3, but Vulcan was very good as well. And in particular, Vulcan, they closed out these summer regular season in the North American LCS by going something like 8-0 in their last 8 matches, something like that. They closed on a great record. They won all their games in Super Week, the last week, and they were 3-0 the week before that too. So they had a great finish to the end of the season. Now, in the actual playoffs, they didn't look quite so good. In the playoffs, they, they played Sullla Mid in their first match, and they lost 0-2. They did not look good in those games. They then played Dignitas in the third place match, and they stomped all over Dignitas. It was not close. They destroyed Dignitas. They looked much better in the third place match, and that earned them their slot to Worlds. Vulcan, an unusual team in a lot of senses. They are a very unpredictable team. One of their strengths is that they play a lot of champions. They have a very wide champion pool, and that's something that not a lot of North American teams have. They can pretty much everyone on their team can play a very wide stretch of champions. In particular, Mandatory Cloud in mid and Xmithy in jungle both play a lot of champions. Their team is, it's really hard to predict how they're going to do, in large part because this team has never played any international teams before. I mean, I was talking about Fnatic, which has a long history of international play. Gambit, long history of international play. Vulcan has never played anyone outside of North America. So it's very hard to predict how they're going to do with this lineup. That's why they're sort of like the dark horse, as I said. People just don't know. We don't really know. I mean, they could go out and fall on their faces, or they could go out and look great. They also tend to play certain champion setups that tend to snowball really hard one way or the other. Like Xmithy enjoys playing Jungle Lee Sin and Jungle Eve. Like when he plays Jungle Eve, the game either usually goes really well or really badly when they run those kind of lineups, but it's hard to say. Now, Vulcan is a little bit like a European team in the sense that Mandatory Cloud, their mid laner, they are very, very heavily reliant on Mandatory Cloud, who is, I would say, pretty clearly the strongest mid laner in North America. He was just carrying them for long stretches in the spring split. In the summer split, the rest of the team was a lot stronger, but they really looked to Mandatory Cloud to make plays and lead the team. The other word on them is that their AD, Zuna, their AD carry, is a little suspect in terms of his mechanics. There are a number of times where he gets caught way too far forward and gets bursted down, which is a big no-no if you're playing AD. I know just from watching the games that I've seen that happen, definitely have seen that happen, that there have been times where he's getting hit by an Ash Arrow or something like that, which should really never happen to an AD. You should not be in front to get hit by something like that or something silly. In their playoff match against Team Sullla Mid, that definitely happened. They exploited Zuna being out of position on a number of occasions. So a lot of people are like, hey, I like Vulcan, but I'm a little skeptical of Zuna. So we will see. I know I keep saying that for each team, but Vulcan will be an interesting one to watch. And then finally, the last team, Mineski. I believe that this team is from the Philippines. Yes, okay, that's what it says there. Yeah, this team, don't really know much of anything about them. They kind of came out of nowhere to win the Southeast Asia qualifying thing. They kind of, went on like a magical run in the Southeast Asian regional, and nobody really seems to know very much about this team other than the fact that they basically came out of nowhere, and they were just basically an average team in their local league during the regular season, but they knocked a whole bunch of other teams out in the playoffs. So they made it over some other teams that were expected to advance. But there's not much I can say. I've never seen this team play. I know nothing about this team. They're a total mystery to me. But most people are not expecting them to do much of anything. They're very much like Gaming Gear EU in the other pool. People expect them to, pretty much get smashed by the other teams because they're not really seen as being at a world-class level. In any case, though, so sort of rough prediction from this group. This group feels like it's a little bit more open. Mineski, I don't think, has much of a chance to make it, but the other 4 teams all have at least some shot. Ozone is probably the favorite to get one of those 2 spots, but as far as these other ones, it's really anyone's guess. I would say that Gambit and Fnatic probably have a better chance than Vulcan, but I mean, would I be surprised if Vulcan came out of nowhere and got another spot? No, not really. I don't think Ozone is a lock to get a spot from here either, just because Gambit and Fnatic are both very good. And as I've said, they have had success against Korean teams before. Fnatic, not as much, but Fnatic has played has played a lot of international matches. Maybe not necessarily with this lineup, but some members of this team, like Soaz, has been around forever. Yellowstar been around in this scene forever too. So Cyanide has been. I mean, even if their players haven't necessarily been on Fnatic, like Soaz was. Soaz has been on a whole bunch of different teams. He was on Against All Authority for a long time, and Cyanide's been on. I think Cyanide has been on 3 different teams. I think Cyanide was on Against All Authority, SK, and Fnatic. I believe he's one player that's been in all 3 all 3 championships. So their players have a ton of international experience, even if they necessarily haven't been on Fnatic when they got it. So I give them a little bit of an edge, but I do think this group is more wide open, and I think a lot of these teams have a good shot. So they will play the matches. 2 teams will make it out of each group, and then they'll get matched up against the teams in the quarterfinals. Now, the weird thing about this is a lot of the quarterfinal teams are probably not as good as the group stage teams, and I know that that's kind of weird. It's one thing that I hope Riot will look back at doing. I hope that they do one of 2 things: either decide how they seed these teams differently, or alternately, that they don't have teams getting automatically placed into the quarterfinals. What would be more fun, I think, is if they just had a huge group stage set up. If they had 16 teams and they just had a big group stage, 4 pods of 4 or 2 pods of 8 or something like that. You could have 15 teams and have 3 groups of 3 or something like that. But I think that they need to be very careful about how they do this, because the situation with these teams in the quarterfinals is quite strange in a lot of ways. It's quite strange. Let's go through these teams. I'll start with Cloud9, which is the team out of these I'm most familiar with. Cloud9 is the North American champion. They were new in the summer split of the LCS. They actually almost made it in the spring split. They lost a heartbreaking match to Team Marn when they were trying to qualify. But they made it in the summer, and they dominated from day one. The very first week of the summer LCS, they went 5-0 that week. Everyone was like, we got to see, is Cloud9 for real, or are we going to ride the Cloud9 hype train? And as it turned out, yes, they were for real. They went undefeated the first week, never looked back, finished 25-3 in the regular season. In the playoffs, they were matched up against, who did they play first? They played, played Dignitas in their first match. Yeah, played Dignitas in their first match. Easy, 2-0, not close. Then they played Team Sullla Mid in the final, 3-0, not really close. None of the matches were really that close. Cloud9 was pretty decisively won all 3 of them. So that gave them a finishing record in North America of 30 wins and 3 losses, which is a ridiculous winning rate. That's 91%. 30 out of 33 overall. So really, really crazy stuff. Now, what everybody wants to see is we all want to see Cloud9 play against teams from other regions, because they've never played anyone not from North America. I mean, yes, they're clearly the best in North America. There's no doubt about that. They destroyed the North American scene. But how good are they compared to European teams or Korean and Chinese teams? Well, the sad thing about this format is we might not ever see that. We have no idea who Cloud9 is going to play. They will play one of the teams that qualifies out of this, out of the group stages, but we don't know who that's going to be. It's possible that they could end up playing someone like Vulcan or Sullla Mid, and then they would not be up against a team from another region, and that would not be that interesting. It's also possible that Cloud9 could get unlucky and get matched up against someone like SK Telecom. They could get matched up against SK Telecom, get knocked out 0-2, and then we would never really see them play much of anything. In other words, that's pretty much what happened to Sullla Mid last year. They played Frost, like I said. They played Azubu Frost and got knocked out 0-2, and then they were done. So it's really a shame that we won't get to see them play more games, because I think people really want to see them play. So hopefully they'll play someone who's not a North American team. But the team that I would most like to see them play, just personally speaking, is I would really like to see them play Gambit, if by some chance that would happen. I think that would be really fun to watch, just because their styles of play are so different in a lot of ways. I would really like to see how the famous counter jungling of someone like Diamond would go up against Meteos's I'm just going to farm the jungle all day and pretty much never gank lanes. I think that would be a very fun contrast in styles. So Cloud9 will be sitting out the group stage, and whereas all these other teams are going to get to play at least 8 games, they could potentially only play 2 games, as little as that, and that's kind of disappointing. So it's really a shame. I'm just genuinely curious. I've seen every single game of the North American LCS and all the playoff games, and I'm just genuinely curious as to, well, how do they stack up against the other regions? And I honestly do not know, because they've never played. So I hope that they'll play someone from a different region, and we'll find out, won't we? We'll find out if they're, really as good as they've looked in North America. All right, other teams here. Royal Club, as I said, Royal Club's the other Chinese team. They have placed into the quarterfinals by virtue of winning the Chinese regional qualifier. I can't say too much about this team. I've never seen them play. That really, there's not much to say. I can't speak with any kind of intelligence about a team I've never seen play. Again, the rumor was that they beat OMG, that OMG, the word is OMG is actually better than Royal, but that OMG deliberately threw the playoff because they wanted to be in the group stage. I don't know if that's true. That was the word. The focus for this team is, the word is their bottom lane is the strength of this team. And that's about all I can really say, that they're known for having a really good bottom lane pairing. So I guess we'll find out. They'll be up against one of those 4 teams that qualifies. Now, Najin Black Sword is the official Korean first place team, and I put the air quotations in place for that because they are not considered to be Korea's strongest team at all. They basically made it to the Worlds because they won the Winter OGN, and they got a ton of circuit points for doing that. That said, Najin Black Sword has not been all that good recently. Yeah, I mean, they have not really done very well in these, not that well in the spring OGN, but they did very poorly in the summer OGN. In fact, they are either like deliberately pulling a rope-a-dope strategy and not showing people that much, or they're just fallen off and are not as good. So the general perception is they are the weakest of the 3 Korean teams, even though they've been placed into the quarterfinals. So that's a little bit unusual. This team was really, really good in late 2012 and early 2013. That was when they had Mac Noon on their team, and they played in some international tournaments, and they were just dominating. But the word is they have fallen off pretty far from that, and they are not dominant right now. So there's a chance that somebody from the group stage could hit this team, and they might be in pretty good shape because this team, as I said, is perceived to be the weakest of the Korean teams. The strength of this team is the bottom lane. That Prey is famed for being a really, really good AD player. I haven't actually seen. Oh, that's not true. I did see him play in All Stars, and he was quite good in All Stars. Although it would be a completely different team than the other people who went to All Stars, because none of the other people on Najin Black Sword were at All Stars. Just Prey. I guess we'll find out. It's hard to say because we don't even know who they're going to be up against at this point. Anyway, and then finally, we have the Gamania Bears, who is from Taiwan. That's what that flag is, right? Yes, who is from Taiwan. They're the Taiwanese champions. They were able to win out over the other Taiwanese teams. They knocked out teams like the Taipei Assassins, but who, by the way, are much weaker than their roster was really decimated since last year. But they knocked out the Taipei Assassins and some of the other highly touted teams in the Taiwan area. But again, the word is this team gets a bye into the quarterfinals because they won their region, but they're not considered to be all that good. They're widely perceived to be one of the weaker teams in the field, much like Gaming Gear and much like, what's the other one, Mineski. They're probably better than Mineski just because they do come from more of sort of a background and pedigree, but this team is really not considered to be all that strong. So, I mean, you've got a situation here where you've got maybe the second best of the 2 Chinese teams, the third best of the 3 Korean teams, and then a Southeast Asian team, or excuse me, not from Southeast Asia, from Taiwan, that's not considered to be all that good, and they're the ones who have all the byes to the quarterfinals. So it's very strange. A lot of the teams that advance out of the group stages, they're probably going to be heavily favored in just about every single one of these matches, except potentially Cloud9. But the winners of the group stages are probably going to be favored in most of these quarterfinal matches, which is a very odd thing, right? You wouldn't think that would be the case. You'd think the teams that got byes would be teams that would be better, but that's really not the case. These teams are perceived as being weaker than a lot of the group stages. So the group stages are going to be crucially important. There's some very good teams that are not going to make it out of the group stages. And in fact, there's a good chance that the 4 teams that make it out of the group stages will all win their quarterfinal matches and then jump immediately into the semifinals from there. Like, there's a very good chance that could happen. So in particular, I would be very worried if I'm one of these quarterfinal teams, because there's a good chance that they could play 2 games and immediately be out. And that's a bit of a shame. So I hope that maybe for Season 4, right, we'll look at doing more of the round-robin thing, because the group stage is going to be amazing. I'm actually looking more forward to the group stage than I am to the quarterfinals, which is weird, right? Shouldn't it be the other way around? But I feel like the group stage is going to be more fun. Any case, though, that's all the teams. So we'll have to see who the matchups go through. Who do I think is going to win? Really don't know. Until I see the teams play, I won't be able to say. give me a weekend to watch the teams actually play, and I'll be able to give you a better shot of who I think looks good and looks bad. But with I've never seen literally half these teams play, so can't really speak to whether they're good or bad or what have you. But it's going to be really fun to watch them play and see what happens. But yeah, so there you go. That's pretty much what my thoughts are. I'm going to be looking forward. It'll be great on Sunday. As someone living in the U.S., I can watch American football, NFL, and also have the stream on for these games. If you're getting really bad, laggy results from Twitch, try watching on either YouTube or also on Azubu, which will also be streaming. Twitch may well explode with the number of viewers who are going to be watching some of these games, so feel free to try to catch it somewhere else. And we will see. I know I've said that probably 30 times here as I've gone through that. We shall see. We will find out. And it's going to be fun to watch. We should get some very high quality games. Oh, a couple quick predictions I will do. Things that are not about what team's going to advance, but just some sort of random things that I think will happen. Okay, number one, there will be at least one humongous upset that people don't see coming, because that always happens in sports, whether it's athletic sports, real sports, or the esports stuff like this. There will be at least one huge upset that no one expects in the group stages. And I don't know what that will be, but it will happen at least one time. Like last year, it was these, what was it, the Saigon Jokers, I think they were, that actually this was this team that everybody thought was going to get destroyed. They actually beat Dignitas. They actually finished with a better record than Dignitas in the group stage, which was pretty funny. Like, that came out of nowhere. So there'll be at least one huge upset that no one expects. There will probably be at least one team, there will probably be one team somewhere that comes out of nowhere that no one expects that will make it through. So there'll be, like I said, there'll be at least one game that's a huge upset. There'll probably be one person to come through. There will be at least one of these players that is not very well known will like pull off some godlike play and will become a huge name by the end of the tournament. Who that will be, I have no idea. But one of these people that is from like China or something, or from like Southeast Asia, and no one's ever heard of them in their lives, will do something amazing, and people will be like, "Oh my God, that guy's amazing!" In the same way that somebody like Toys or Stanley from Taipei Assassins last year, people were like, "Wow, these people are amazing." So you'll see that, and we'll get a whole bunch of threads on Reddit and a whole bunch of video clips on YouTube where people are like replaying something amazing over and over and over again. And so I guess that's not going out on a limb, but that's the kind of thing that we will most definitely see. Oh, and I do think at least one highly favored team is going to crumble and fall apart, because that always happens too, right? That's the converse. You get an underdog that comes out of nowhere. One of these teams will just completely lose it, and will just completely crash and burn in this tournament. So who would that? Let's see. Who do we want to point to from last year? I guess an obvious candidate would be someone like Sullla Mid, who was very disappointing for a lot of people in last year's performance. Anyone else I can think of? Teams that got knocked out immediately in the groups in the knockout stage. Nothing's coming to mind right now. And I don't want to just sit here stalling for time because the video is right around the hour mark. In any case, though, hope that was useful. I know this was requested. Hope people enjoy this. And I'll be watching along with everybody else on Sunday. And really looking forward to it. So hope people have a chance to watch, hope people enjoy the games, and hope that they're as good as we're all anticipating. Anyway, until next time, have a great weekend. Enjoy. Take care, guys.